Thank you all so much for being here today. As you know, the American people are facing many crises right now. We continue to lose jobs, to lose decent wages, our homes, affordable health care, higher education. Our civil liberties are under attack, and the prospects for a stable climate future are in great peril. Meanwhile, the wealthy few are richer than ever, and the political establishment is not fixing this. In fact, they are making it worse by imposing austerity on the American people while continuing to squander trillions of dollars on wars, Wall Street, and tax breaks for the wealthy. The American people are clearly at the breaking point, and in our campaign, we intend to turn the breaking point into a tipping point, to take back the promise of our democracy and the peaceful, just, green future that we deserve. One of the ways that we do that is by giving everyday people who are otherwise locked out of this election, by giving them a real voice and a choice at the polls that's not bought and paid for by Wall Street. And we also intend to put real solutions on the table that the American people are clamoring for. Really providing jobs, not merely more tax breaks for corporations or corporate subsidies that were provided by the first stimulus package. Instead, we have a plan for providing jobs. It's called the Green New Deal. It will create 25 million jobs, put an end to unemployment, and jumpstart the green economy for the 21st century. And that economy will put a halt to climate change and make wars for oil obsolete. We're calling for health care as a human right under a Medicare for All system that not only covers everybody, it puts you back in control of your health care decisions instead of having them dictated by a CEO who's looking to make maximum profit on those decisions, but it also saves us trillions of dollars over the next decade. And it does that by eliminating the massive, wasteful private health insurance bureaucracy and by stabilizing medical inflation. We're also talking about an immediate moratorium on home foreclosures, about making public higher education free. We've done that before, and it pays for itself many times over. We put many millions of soldiers to college after World War II, and the numbers show for every dollar we invested as taxpayers, we got about $7 back in economic benefits to the economy and return revenues. And we are calling finally for downsizing the bloated military, which is not making us more secure, it's making us less secure. It is not winning us friends overseas, and it's certainly draining our economy of the resources we need for true security here at home. So these are some of the things that we will be putting on the table and driving into the political debate because without our voices, there will be no real debate. We intend to drive that debate forward, to move these solutions forward, and to get as far as we can go to changing the White House into a greenhouse in the course of this election and beyond. I am so honored and delighted to be able to introduce my running mate, Cheri Honkala, who is one of the nation's leading anti-poverty advocates. You know, we don't hear much about the P word in this election, but it's a really important word for us to be talking about, not only as an issue in its own right, but as an issue that's increasingly central to the lives of the American people. We know from the recent census that 1 out of every 2 Americans is now either in poverty or close to it in being low income. The ranks of the impoverished are growing by the millions. So it's very important that we address the underlying causes and the scourge of poverty. Cheri is the national coordinator for the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Coalition, and her work grows out of her own very compelling experience as a formerly homeless single mother. And she has transformed her experience into an uplift for so many millions of people who are struggling with exactly the same thing. In the tradition of Martin Luther King, who called for an economic Bill of Rights in order to free America of the misery of poverty and racism, Cheri Honkala continues that tradition and brings it into the work of this campaign. So I turn it over to Cheri with great appreciation for her sharing the ticket.
Thank you, Jill. I just want to start off by saying that when Jill called me and asked me if I would accept the offer of being on the ticket of being the vice presidential candidate, I was absolutely shocked, but I knew that my 25 years of traveling this country, visiting Native American reservations, of going to trailer parks in Iowa, visiting folks that were impacted by Katrina in both New Orleans and Mississippi, in visiting the Cabrini housing projects and watching the dismantling of public housing in this country, and hosting hundreds and hundreds of families across the country and helping them find a place to sleep at night. And knowing that not only are we in trouble here in this country, but that we have a global economy, and that every single day 40,000 children die in this the world that we live in. Here in Baltimore, another 2,500 are losing their jobs as steel workers. And I knew that I had to accept the offer, because I believe that I can bring to this campaign a human face. And the P word that Jill was talking about, of course, is poverty. An issue that hasn't been talked about by either President Obama or Mitt Romney. We intend to put faces on the people, the American people that are hurting right now, either to get something or to hold on to what it is that they have. This last few years, we've seen 6 million families lose their homes. These are folks that had stable employment, two-car garages, worked at labor unions, had good salaries, and now have fallen. These are folks that thought that they would never enter the ranks of the poor. These are now families that are living in vans, in the back of pickup trucks, parked in parking lots, behind churches, and the list goes on. 3 weeks ago, I got a knock on my door at the middle of the night from the Department of Human Services, Child Protection in Philadelphia. And the anonymous social worker said, "Cheri, you have to help me tonight. I have a family of 5 outside in the car. And if you don't take them in, I have to remove the children from the parents because their water was shut off in their home." So instead of the city helping a family figure out how to have running water in the house, children, not just in Philadelphia, but throughout the entire country, are being fast-tracked into adoption only because they can't provide the basic necessities of life, because they don't have something as basic as a decent paying job in this country. I refuse to proceed from this notion of scarcity. We live in a country that is wealthy, there's enough to go around, and we intend to talk about this growing gap of inequality between the wealthy in this country and the devastating situation that most Americans are facing. So I'm going to be working very, very hard from now until November in ensuring that the majority of the people in this country that are struggling just to get that carton of milk, that we put a face on them, we hear about their stories in this presidential race. Thank you.
We'll take questions now, if anybody has questions. Allison?
You're on the ballot so far in 21 states, and you're trying to be on the ballot in 45 states this year, which is kind of huge for you guys. Talk to us about what that means for the election process as a whole, and how it affects the other mainstream political parties that you are.
Yeah, well, what it does is it ties us up in knots so that they don't have to deal with the voice of an opposition party. You know, we don't, this system didn't happen by accident. You know, by design, the opposition voice is muzzled. We have been very busy ensuring that we get on the ballot. And I'm delighted to say that with very few exceptions, we have made just about every ballot access deadline and threshold. The states that remaining are those whose deadlines have not yet come up. We have active petition drives going on in just about all the states, and we expect most of them to be accomplished routinely. There are one or two that are very difficult, but most of them, excuse me, should be accomplished just as a matter of course. The worst of it is over, so at this point we hope to really begin to channel our energies on reaching out to those Americans who otherwise don't have a voice in this election, to those who are threatened with foreclosures, to the 36 million students and recent graduates who are effectively indentured servants because they have high debt and they don't have jobs, or if they have jobs, they're minimum wage service industry jobs. You know, to talk to just working people as well whose wages are being cut. So there are just, you know, there's just a whole panoply of issues that badly need to be discussed and driven into the broader dialogue. And we're here as a reality check on this, you know, on this presidential mockery of a debate.
If you're not in the debates because you don't have enough percentage of voters, how do you get that message out?
You know, we'll cross that bridge if we come to it. Right now, we are going to do everything in our power to get to 15%. And if you simply put together the numbers of people who've been foreclosed upon, or the 1 out of every 3 homeowners who is underwater right now and at risk for foreclosure, add to that the 36 million students who you know, are indentured servants, you're going to get to 15% really quickly. So it's all about getting the word out. We've seen in Tahrir Square in Tunisia that there are effective tools of social communications these days that can get the word out for the first time in a presidential election without having to make the backroom compromises to get the big money to make those communications effective. So we hope to you know, build on the groundswell that is out there for exactly this kind of campaign. Thank you.
And just for members of the news media, you have been effectively shut out of the debates as well. The Commission on Presidential Debates is a private entity that is controlled and funded by major corporations and by the 2 establishment parties. The League of Women Voters did a fine job for many years, and we'd certainly be interested in seeing the news media join the mayors of cities like Washington, D.C. and Pittsburgh, who have called for truly independent debates that will serve the people that they represent.
Monica?
Some people have argued that the Green Party should begin by focusing on local elections and building support from the ground up. Can you talk about why you think it's important to have a national presidential campaign?
Sure. And I have to say I strongly agree that it's very important to build from the ground up. In fact, I have spent my entire activist life building from the ground up. And I guess my experience maybe it illustrates why we can't only build from the ground up. And I was persuaded for the first time a year ago to become involved in the national fight. And I was persuaded when the president put Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid on the chopping block as part of the solution to the debt ceiling crisis a year ago. And for me, that was the breaking point. I strongly agree that grassroots democracy grows from the local community up. But at the same time, we have a state of emergency, I think, at the national, and to silence the only hope of an opposition voice in this election when so much is at stake, I think would be just a terrible loss for the American people. There's no reason why Americans should have to walk into the voting booth in November and have only effectively 2 Wall Street sponsored choices. Because to vote for either of them effectively gives a mandate for 4 more years of Wall Street rule. And I think that is a disaster that we just can't afford to allow to happen, both for the economy, for the climate, for the free trade agreements, which are now being negotiated by this White House, which are basically NAFTA on steroids, for the continuing undermining of workers' wages, with the president touting General Motors as the example to emulate, where corporate profits are doing great and CEO salaries are in fine shape, but the pay of workers has been slashed. They no longer have living wages, new workers coming in, this 2- and 3-tiered model for, for wages. It's awful. It's not sustainable. It is a state of emergency, and we don't move forward unless we actually drive some solutions into the debate, and they're not going to do it for us. We've seen this incredible, economic disparity, which has become completely dysfunctional for the American economy, where workers cannot afford to put money back into the economy and fuel it with consumer demand. Consumer demand has basically collapsed, and that's an inevitable consequence of this growing gap between rich and poor. So we've got to fix it. Otherwise, there is no exit strategy. They're not going to provide it for us. So the American people need a voice in this election, and we need it now.
Some more questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Christian Manneke from a German newspaper, Süddeutsche Zeitung. Could you respond to the critique that another candidate on the left will only talk to Republicans and, the drill?
Sure.
Another Florida for Al Gore, or
Who's the other candidate?
maybe Wisconsin and Obama.
What other candidate?
What other candidate on the left?
Yeah, so let me say a couple of things. First of all, the conventional wisdom, that Nader destroyed the race for Gore, it's not supported by analyses that actually look at who came out to vote. And the reality is that people came out to vote for Nader who otherwise wouldn't have voted at all, and that in fact more votes went from the Democratic Party to the Republicans than Nader had in his entire voting bloc. So which is the bigger problem here? Clearly the bigger problem was that the Democrats were losing their own core constituency to Republicans. That was the main driver of the votes here. And then also to recall that the Supreme Court deprived the American voters of the real vote count, and had it proceeded, the analyses suggest the result would have been very different. So it's a convenient scapegoat, and it's a convenient public relations campaign to try to suppress the voice of the opposition. But I think the American people see that it's very dangerous not to have an opposition party. Again, for the last 10 years, at least, there has been this fear campaign that we dare not stand up and vote for what we believe or for what we need, that it's very dangerous to vote your values, you have to vote your fears. But we now have 10 years of experience to see where this strategy has gone, and it's pretty clear that silence is not an effective political strategy, and the politics of fear has basically delivered everything we were afraid of. All those reasons that progressives and people of conscience were supposed to be quiet and muzzle themselves, because you didn't want an expanding war. You didn't want a president who would attack our civil liberties. You didn't want a president who would just give trillions of dollars in bailouts to Wall Street. You didn't want someone who was going to expand these terrible free trade agreements that undermine wages for workers. All those things we were supposed to avoid by keeping quiet, we've gotten in spades because we've been quiet. The only way out of this is by a democracy. And if the public interest candidate is removed, then all you have is public relations campaigns for corporate-sponsored candidates. That's just going to continue to accelerate this surge to the right, which has been very harmful to the needs of the American people. So we're here to replace the politics of fear with the politics of courage. And in fact, to look back at history and how we have made progress is always through a combination of a social movement on the ground together with an independent political party. Whether you're looking at the abolition of slavery or women's right to vote or the right to form unions, to have a 40-hour work week and safe workplaces, you've always had an independent third party helping to articulate the vision, the agenda, and the demands and drive them forward. That's how we make progress.
Allison?
Since you're on the ballot in so many more states this time around than you were then, and several of them are battleground states, does that change the argument that you just made?
In my view, no. I mean, people talk about safe states and unsafe states. In my view, no state is safe. No state is safe in the era where our economy is about to head over the cliff again. And for 4 years, nothing has been done. And, you know, Dodd-Frank doesn't begin to solve the problem. A very watered-down bill that created an elaborate regulatory process that provided just a whole other wave of watering down. We have not solved this problem. The banks are still too big to fail. In fact, they're bigger than ever. Too big to fail and too big to jail. We haven't solved the problem. We're in incredible economic peril. We've seen that with the latest revelations about the LIBOR scandal, which is beginning to come home to roost here as well. So the scandals haven't been fixed. Not a single executive from Wall Street has gone to jail. And in contrast with the Reagan era, when thousands, well over 1,000 executives actually paid. There was real accountability. There is none now. And the economy continues to be at incredible risk. And I'd also mention the climate here, because in the last several weeks we've certainly seen what our climate future looks like. And this is just a taste of what's to come. And we know well that we cannot allow this to go on and expect to fix it sometime after 2020, which is effectively what the president has done.
And just to be clear, Ralph Nader was on the ballot, I believe, in 47 states in 2000. What is significant about this is that this is the first time that you have a Green Party member who's coming up through the ranks, where this has been done entirely by Greens. Ralph Nader was and is a historic figure, so that is why it is such a significant accomplishment that Dr. Stein and Cheri Honkala will be on the ballot.
The other accomplishment is the federal match.
Well, the federal matching funds, of course. I think we addressed that earlier.
More questions? Yes, sir.
Yes. You mentioned you're not dominated by corporate sponsorship. Have you any corporate sponsorship? Have you a litmus test for that? Has anyone stepped forward, like a Patagonia type of company that's environmentally responsible or claims to be, and supported you?
Great. Okay. The Green Party itself does not accept corporate contribution or from any corporate executive who hires a lobbyist. Our concern is to avoid money that comes with strings attached. So we have a number of rules. Obviously we don't have an enforcement arm, but we make our rules very clear, and if it comes to our attention that those rules have been violated, we return the money.
And the Green Party actually has been offered money by corporations, and I'm not sure Patagonia was one of them in the past, but they were certainly in the green sector and has never accepted money.
Yes, sir.
Yes, the Hispanic community or the immigrant community has been always in the sandwich, the political sandwich between both parties, playing politics with the immigrants' needs. What is your take on that?
Unequal. Okay, great. Yes, I didn't mention it, for lack of time, but it's clearly a major concern in our agenda to support immigrant rights as human rights. We believe that the problems related to a rise in undocumented immigration resulted largely from NAFTA I mean, we know that historically. We know that after NAFTA, undocumented immigrants basically tripled, and that happened because NAFTA created a wave of economic refugees. So to the extent that a wave of refugees is stressful, it's stressful for the refugees who've had to leave their home communities, and it's stressful for receiving communities to provide for that influx. That needs to be fixed by renegotiating NAFTA and free trade agreements so that they respect working people south of the border as well as in this country. But that said, we believe that immigrant rights are human rights, and it's very important to provide a welcoming, respectful path to citizenship for the immigrants who are a critical part of our communities and our economy. We are a nation of immigrants. That is our diversity, that's our strength, and we need to maintain that welcoming tradition.
Yes, sir.
Could you talk a little bit about the effect that having such a high-profile person as Roseanne Barr has had on the Green Party so far during the campaign?
I think it's been wonderful that Roseanne has had the courage to actually stand up and stand for what she really believes in, what she's concerned about as a mother and a grandmother. I think Roseanne's concerns and my concerns and the concerns of, dare I say, most parents are very similar. And I have great respect for Roseanne for taking the challenges and the hardships of running a political campaign upon herself. I think she should be a role model for other people of means and celebrity status for them to do the same. And I think it's been very helpful for our campaign to have the greater attention that Roseanne has brought to the party and to the very problematic political process out there as a whole.
More questions? Yes, sir.
You both talked about the P word, poverty. Given the voting block and how folks have been criticized that, okay, poverty folks, poor folks do not come out and vote. How do you expect to engage folks that feel disenfranchised, folks that have voter apathy? How do you expect to engage that voting block?
Well, I think it's going to be a lot easier for us as opposed to Wall Street candidates because we're in touch with the people. And myself being an anti-poverty advocate for the last 25 years, I know where people live. I talk to them. I hang out with them. You know, we have networks in every community of every color in both urban and rural areas. And we intend to, you know, I really view it as a sleeping giant. All you have to do is actually get out there, get away from just online organizing, and knock on the doors and say, okay, these folks represent Wall Street, these folks represent you, your issues, what you're facing, and become a Green Party member. And this is our platform. And it takes about 5 minutes and people will switch parties. So it's only a question of education and registration, and that's what we're already beginning to do across this entire country. And the other thing is that we have a great number of young people, and young people know how to use social media, and we intend to really use that in this campaign as well. As well as trying to have stuff in as many languages as possible.
John?
Question, I know this is speculative for most of us here, but what would be, should you gain the White House, what would be your priorities once you get there for the first, let's say, 100 days?
Sure. You know, our priorities in governing are basically our priorities as we lay them out for the campaign. That is to create the Green New Deal because we have a jobs emergency as well as a climate emergency. And it's a convergent solution because in creating green jobs, you do a number of other things. You deal with the climate crisis and you make wars for oil obsolete. Now, since we're spending $1 trillion a year on the bloated military-industrial security complex, that then enables us to cut way back on those expenditures. Say you cut it back by half, because it's basically doubled over the last decade. Let's take it back to where it was pre-Bush. That frees up, you know, $500 billion every year, which is plenty of money to get things going with. Medicare for all is actually a cost saver. It's not a cost driver. Contrary to the prevailing mythology, it actually saves us trillions of dollars over the next decade. That's another way that we ensure that we have the resources to pay for the things that cost. Public higher education, providing it tuition free. We know that that too is a cost saver in the long run. It requires some dollars up front for the investment, and that can come from the savings basically in downsizing the military. So yeah, I mean that's basically where we begin, and I think the biggest question is how would you do this, you know? And we're faced with that question all the time. And I have to say that this is actually an issue we have a lot of experience with at the state level, and it's sort of a common sense solution. The president needn't be simply the commander-in-chief. The president could also be the organizer-in-chief and actually inform and empower ordinary citizens to participate in the process. Our representatives are supposed to represent us, but it's hard for them to do that when we don't know what's going down, which bills are being voted on, and what their relevance is to us. So say Medicare for All is up for a vote next week. The president has so many ways to ensure that people understand what the stakes are and what the, you know, here are the 3 talking points. Go call your senator and your congressmen and women and make sure that they know that you are watching what they do, that you need that vote. It's for lack of an informed and empowered citizenry that we have a Congress and a White House that's essentially run amok. They are run by lobbyists because we don't have a participatory citizen counterweight. But a president can do so many things to ensure that there is citizen participation and to make it simple, straightforward. There are models for doing this. We've done it in Massachusetts at the state level. We have blocked bills that were considered slam dunks. There were no way that you were going to stop the development industry from getting their hands on basically 40,000 acres of state land that was going to be sold off. And, you know, by informing people about what the stakes of this bill were, we stopped it year after year after year until they finally stopped trying. So we have examples of success for how to get this done.
Yes, sir.
Very quick question. I remember in '73, the search for alternative energy almost became an industry within itself on the campuses and in corporate. And I see it happening now without anything really coming out from the other end. And I remember in '60, Kennedy said a man on the moon in 10 years. What would you do to actually focus the search for alternative energy instead of just giving out grants for research across the spectrum?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Actually come up with something.
Sure. You know, and I think there are really good examples on the ground now. Right now, we don't need to wait for new technology. There are critically important things that have to be done right now that not only deal with the energy side of this and the climate side, but also deal with the job side of this. So overnight, practically, we could create an army of working people who are weatherizing and insulating our homes, government buildings, schools, and private residences. We could create so many more jobs than what's talked about for the Keystone Pipeline, for example. In fact, dollar for dollar, every dollar invested creates 3 times more jobs in renewable energy and conservation. So we would certainly begin with conservation where we could make our quickest gains overnight. And I think the experience in Germany with the launching of the solar industry is really compelling, where they had a plan about how they were going to do it. It wasn't just one big corporation that was sort of, you know, go do what you want to do. There was a national plan about launching the industry, and it worked so well that they had to cut back their subsidies much sooner than expected because it just took off It created a lot of jobs. It greatly brought down the price of solar. You know, this is a win-win. We need to employ some of those win-win models that have been basically kept off the table by this cabal of, you know, sort of the Wall Street version, the Wall Street and fossil fuel and nuclear version of our future. That's what dominates the current White House, and that's why we need to change it.
Some more questions? Any more questions at this point? We'll remain up here for a couple of minutes for photographs to be taken, and then we'll, you know, please join us downstairs in the Chesapeake room where the show will go on. Yes.
One more small question.
Oh, one question, okay.
If you don't mind, sorry. I want to talk about what you're doing to engage communities of color. There's been a lot of criticism that neither Democrats nor Republicans are dealing with African Americans, they're dealing with Latinos, the fastest growing population in the country. I wonder what the Green Party is doing to speak to those communities.
Well, I've never not engaged. So it would be a new thing. Just my immediate family, you know, my immediate family. I have a brother-in-law from Kenya, I have another brother-in-law from the Sudan, and I have nieces and nephews, and my other sister is married to an African American. My son himself is Puerto Rican. So just my, you know, Christmas time or whatever holiday, we fight about what kind of food we're going to eat, and you know, whose house and what culture and all of these kinds of things. But beyond that, you know, we intend to not sit around and talk about, you know, the racial composition of the Green Party over and over again. We know that we need to bring large numbers of people of color into the party because this is the party that represents the people in this country. And so the best thing to do is just make it happen. And we have those relationships, and where I'm from, West Kensington, one of the poorest districts on Mutter Street. It's a multiracial community of poor folks. It has one of the highest number of greens that are growing in a very long time in Philadelphia.
But specifically, I mean, besides just knocking on doors.
Oh, yes. You know, talking to various different leaders across the country, you know, African American leaders, you know, indigenous leaders, you name it. Listening to folks about what are the important priority issues, where we need to be focusing, what demonstrations we need to be participating in. You know, engaging. I think art and culture is an incredibly important way to engage folks. And yes, I mean, all of these and I think something, you know, that I did during my sheriff's campaign, I was probably the only candidate when I ran in Philadelphia for sheriff that had something, you know, available in like 4 different languages. And most politicians have nothing available in more than, you know, just English. And so, you know, and we're going to get a lot of those answers from those leaders across the country of color. Thank you.
Just practically speaking as well, with the campaign matching funds, one of our first hires is Spanish language outreach. We already have a number of interns who are doing that. In practice, where Greens have won elections around the country, it's often been a kind of a multiracial coalition at the polls. It's certainly been true in my hometown of Madison, where we elected the first among elected official in the history of our state. Our elected officials have oftentimes been more diverse than our party membership because it is that kind of coalition that can deliver results at the polls. When you look at our candidates who have run nationally, we've had a lot of firsts. We had the first Native American vice presidential candidate, Winona LaDuke. She was also the first Jewish vice presidential candidate, first Arab presidential candidate, or Lebanese, in the case of Ralph Nader, the first Jewish presidential candidate in Jill Stein, the first Finnish presidential candidate in Cheri Honkala, as we found out the other day, also Native American, the first African American presidential candidate who was not a cult member, and Cynthia McKinney, I'm referring to Lenora Fulani.
I-
Yeah, so, but she, she was nominated ahead of Barack Obama and was clearly going to be our nominee, the first Latina vice presidential candidate in Rosa Clemente, and that is reflected at the local level too. And I think, Dr. Stein, you should probably refer to some of the efforts you've done around redistricting in
Sure,
Massachusetts too. I think it's important that people know about that.
In my home state of Massachusetts, the Green Party is actually a merger of the Green Party and the Rainbow Coalition Party, which was, I think, came out of Jesse Jackson's presidential campaign. Part of it affiliated them with the Democratic Party, but part of it did not and remained independent. And that existing independent sector merged with the Green Rainbow Party. So we have a long tradition of addressing issues of racial justice and economic justice and all the rest. And you know, it's been a very wonderful and enriching experience to learn together how to do this. And we actually worked last year, that is the Green Rainbow Party worked with the Black Empowerment Coalition to completely change redistricting in Massachusetts, and we successfully doubled the seats representing the community of color, and it proved itself to be an extremely effective working coalition. So that's just, you know, an example of one of the things that we have done. And you know, we do have, again, a model for how to develop this joint effort in which the African American community is very much in the driver's seat. African American and Latino and generally the community of color is very much in the driver's seat with the party in determining what our priorities are and how we go about meeting them.
And by the way, I live in Washington, D.C., where the D.C. Statehood Green Party is majority black, and the party actually comes out of the D.C. Statehood Party, founded in 1970 by leaders in the local civil rights movement who wanted D.C. to become a state. Any further questions? Well, we will see you downstairs very shortly. You can take pictures, photographs of the candidates right now, and thank you very much for attending this press conference.